So Gab, it's been a long time since, well, we connected since you have been working on your newest venture, but we connected quite a long time ago, and you've had quite a journey like myself as an entrepreneur. So I'd love for you to rewind a little for the audience and tell them a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey, and how you got to this very place right now.
My journey. Yeah. So I went to school. I went to Columbia here in New York a while back, and I thought I wanted to be an architect. And actually, my dad pushed me to also look at engineering. And his pitch was, if you're a civil engineer, then you cover, you can do the whole building, right? You can do the structure, you can do the design. So I studied both architecture and civil engineering only to realize that neither were really for me. That what I was actually interested in was how do buildings work day to day? So you build it, you're done. The architect, the civil engineer, they leave. And we've got these systems that use a ton of energy that keep on operating for years and years and years. And I'll be honest, I think when I was in college, really coming to terms with what climate change meant, buildings seemed like a great place to try to make some kind of difference. And I kind of find my way into a nascent field of energy consulting, which, a decade before Local Law 97, and carbon penalties, there were people in New York City, around the Northeast, already starting to look at energy efficiency retrofits, controls upgrades, putting in variable frequency drives. And I was really excited about that. Through that, I realized I was really passionate about, how do we make things sort of scalable? So the product, the software side, and I was interested in sort of diagnosing buildings. And so I joined a startup that did fault detection and diagnosis. So I think that's around the time we met, actually, hilariously,
I think
at some sort of at a conference or a pitch event. Anyway, so the whole idea of that startup was, grab the data out of buildings and really look at it and see what you can glean about how it's operating and how it could operate better. Which sounds really like, duh, like everybody should be doing that. At the time, it was like, what? Like,
yeah.
how much are you going to save? Like, well, we don't know until we look at your data. And then, generally we've seen this at other buildings, but we don't know what we're going to find in your building, right? It's really cool now to see that space. There's companies like Bueno. It's gotten so much more mature. My friend Leon, who you might know as well, from Bueno, like that space is really taken off. So that's great to see. But in the process of that, the number one issue that really sort of frustrated me was how much we overcool, right? How much we have people bringing heaters into the office, bringing sweaters into the office in August, right? And so this idea of, wasting energy to make people unhappy really blew my mind. And, there's been some steps along the way. I had another startup that was more sort of controls focused, similar, like basically working on the same problem, but not quite getting to the meat of it. Just trying to do sort of like a controls overlay on an existing system and try to improve, how do we adjust set points with really partnering with JBMB, right? So JBMB has been around for 110 years, 400-person MEP design firm, great projects all over the world, really. In terms of like scale, we're talking about the World Trade Center site, Bank of America Tower, like big buildings. I think with them and with SRS, our NUMA's other parent company, it sort of gave me the confidence or the vision of saying, okay, there are stopgap measures of trying to solve this problem of how we make everybody comfortable in the office and how we improve air quality and how we do it in an energy efficient way. But software is not going to do it. It's actually an infrastructure problem. It's a hardware problem. So NUMA, I'm holding one right here, of course.
Show us, yeah.
NUMA is really just saying, okay, maybe we should recognize that everyone is different, right? So what you need is not what I need. And so even if that temperature if that thermostat on the wall says 75, we're still going to have 40% of people who are uncomfortable. And not because they're brats, because they're whiny, because they're physiologically different, right? And you wear different clothes. Like, it's just, there's no way to solve that. And the only way to solve that is really by accepting it. Yes, everybody is different. And then also accepting that the air that we're pushing around buildings is doing a lot of important work, right? It's heating, it's sometimes heating, it's cooling, and it's ventilating. That is a precious resource. As we've shrunk down our energy consumption on LED lighting, as we've gotten more efficient laptops and screens and everything, the biggest chunk in that pie of building energy consumption, that thing that I started working on, in college, is HVAC. It's air conditioning, it's ventilation, it's heating. And so that should be treated as a precious resource. So the real core ideas of NUMA are everyone's different, and this is a precious resource. The resource that we have is the air, right? The cleanest air in a building is the air coming out of the vent, right? And we sort of just shoot it horizontally wherever it might go. And right now, like we've seen, I just posted about this on LinkedIn, but like we've learned a lot about what cleaner air means to us from a health standpoint, right? So we understand now the benefits, right? Famously, JP Morgan Chase in 2022 announced for their new headquarters, they're going to double the outside air rates because they realized it was so important for their employee health, right? To do that, double the code minimum. And it just shows you that like there's a growing consensus around, okay, this is really meaningful for our employees, for the people in buildings to have better air quality. And the way we do that is either by bringing in more air, right? More air changes, more outside air, which comes at an energy penalty. Or, and this is sort of the NUMA idea, that precious resource we deliver more directly to people. So if you look up, wherever you're sitting, there's probably a vent somewhere kind of high and it's shooting air high. Eventually that air gets eventually it kind of mixes. It's intended to mix, which is kind of nuts. So the idea with NUMA is, okay, well, if that's the cleanest air, let's get it to you sooner. And what we've shown through, fluid dynamic simulations, through lab testing, through field testing, is that basically if you have this gentle cone of air above you, and I'll just tilt my screen for a second just to show this. I don't know if that's going to mess up your... So I've got one above my head. If you've got air basically directed in your direction, this cone, it neutralizes a lot of things that can come at you from the side. And it also means that you're breathing more of the cleaner air that just came into the space that's been filtered, that's been mixed with outside air. So that was kind of like the key ideas, kind of like in an airplane, but basically, can we direct air, bring it more directly to people? And then that only really works if they have control. So if you just shot air down at people, you might improve their air quality, but they would probably be like, I'm freezing, I'm hot, right? What you have to do is say, I'm like just ranting now. So, but basically you have to say, you know what? I'm going to give you control about how much air you're going to get, right? I'm going to allow you to open and close. So that precious resource, you take what you need. And then as soon as you walk away, the occupancy sensor detects you, right? You've walked away, it closes down. So we're only delivering to who is there and what they want. And then the exact angle, I'll show you what the device looks like here. But the exact angle can be adjusted, right, using the app. So you pair over Bluetooth. Each device has a name. It can be customized. You pair with it, and then you say, hey, I'm going to point it over here.
I love it. Right? Maybe we can do like a quick screen recording demo and show people exactly what it looks like on the app. Because I think it's one thing to show a functionality, but when you're implementing something on the scale of a whole office, to really put the power in somebody's hand through their device is not only helpful, but it's kind of empowering. I think it probably builds a little bit more of a confidence in the place where you are showing up every day, or three times a day, a week, or whatever it is.
So we you're totally right. You're totally right. Like we came at this from an angle of, okay, if I've, how much how much temperature difference is there between neighbors? Like we were looking at it as like, can we truly deliver a personalized experience without affecting your neighbor, right? Like the number one question we got is like, if I turn mine off or turn mine on, is that going to affect my neighbor? Like, no, this is a tiny cone of air and it's just for you. And you can feel 10 degrees different from your neighbor by that combination of the temperature of the air and the movement, right? So it's not a fan, it's not, high velocity, it's low velocity coupled with whatever the temperature of the central system air is. And that has a huge cooling effect and it can be used for heating. So that was our thing, was very engineering of like, okay, how do we create enough thermal variety? How do we improve air quality, right? So you can't mount NUMA higher than 11 feet off the floor, right? Because the ventilation benefit starts to get literally diluted. So those are the sort of our constraints. But what you just said has really blown our mind in terms of like when you go to a NUMA space, like, we've got projects now in, I think 6 different states, a few different countries. Like when you go to one of these places and you talk to the users, they just like the control. Like there is very little in a lot of these spaces where they have true agency. So that's something that we didn't, very sort of mechanical engineer driven company, yeah, we spent a lot of time on the user interface and making it simple and making it like, really no training required to pair with a device and start using it. But it's really that agency that gets people, that brings joy to people, right?
No,
Like that makes people excited.
I'm not surprised at all. And I think like the best part about tech in our industry is when it can feel like it's making an experience frictionless. It's taking away the clunky nature of what it feels like to submit a work order when something's not working, or like how do you get something done in an office? Like it's usually takes forever. You don't really have that much control. You might have to go talk to the office manager or somebody else to maybe get your thing done. So
sometimes you don't even know who to talk to, right? Sometimes it's intentionally hidden
limited
from you.
Yeah.
Because they don't want it. They got stuff to do. There's like
Definitely
real problems every day in building. I mean, not to say that obviously your comfort is a real problem too, but like they're just trying to maintain the equipment and run things. Now, like they're also spending time getting a hot complaint and a cold complaint from the same space. Like we've had projects that got pulled through, especially retrofits where what the problem is, where the challenges is. We've had retrofits where they've decided to do NUMA on the basis of we have people disagreeing and this is just taking way too much time for our operations team to deal with every day, right?
Of course, what are they supposed to do with like a product like this?
They pretend. Sometimes they lie.
I mean,
sometimes they say like, "Hey, I changed it."
They deal with in a day, and then what happens is, and I really want to tap into this aspect of what you guys are doing on the sustainability side and the energy efficiency side, because I probably would be that person if I was working in an office every day, even though I'm in South Florida. Because I'm in South Florida in the middle of summer, it's so freezing, and any place you go inside, you're absolutely freezing, or at least I'm run cold anyway. I'm freezing every environment I go into, whether it's supermarket, an office, the bank, wherever, restaurant. So, and you can't sit outside because you'll melt. I
grew up in Miami. I know your pain.
That's right. I forgot that about you. That's right. So and I would be the person bringing my own space heater. I have plenty of friends who bring their space heater to their desk.
It's insane.
So not only are you not able to, and it's not their fault, like you need to feel okay in your space, but you're not only not helping the energy load of the building, but you're doubling the energy load of the building. So, and similarly, I can
you've got the personal devices fighting the main system, right? It's like double trouble.
The disaster. So can you get into a little bit of how your device is impacting like the load on the HVAC and potentially like the sustainability of the building? Because we do have things like, in New York City, these municipal incentives and many other cities as well to lower energy usage by these buildings.
Yeah. So again, I think you start from the premise of what if we only deliver cooling for what people need when they are there, right? So to give you kind of an example, we did a site visit for a Fortune 500 company at another one of our sites, right? Like they're thinking about NUMA, so of course they want to see it installed. So we're doing a visit on Friday. The space is unsurprisingly empty because it's a Friday afternoon in New York City, and it's summer, and all the NUMAs are closed. You walk into the space, it's like 76, right? That space would have been 72, right? That space would have been freezing, would have been empty, and it would have been 72. And the energy savings is really based on that. It's like, how much can you dial that back? And the percent savings is something that, we actually use a tool from Berkeley to estimate based on your climate, right? So the two things to keep track of are, are really three. It's what occupancy levels you expect. Like the lower your occupancies, the more you're actually going to save with NUMA, right? So we have a lot of people interested from that standpoint where they can really almost shut down a whole area that's not being utilized. Then even if it's full capacity, right? Even if you had every single desk occupied, the average temperature is still going to be much warmer, right? So you'll walk into a space and you'll feel like, oh, this is probably warmer than I would expect. And the reality is like, yeah, that thermostat is reading warmer. But then if you sit in a NUMA chair, right? If you put that slider that we have fully open, right? And this thing goes to fully open, and you point it right at yourself. There are very few people who like it that cold. There are those people. We've found those people, right? But you will feel as if it's 68 degrees Fahrenheit, right? So that's what I'm talking about in terms of, a range that keeps everybody comfortable. So again, when there's no one there, we can really, really dial back. When it's fully occupied, we still dial back because, you're essentially delivering less cooling for the space because, your average or your background temperature is warmer, such that if somebody likes it warmer, right? I actually run cold. I probably would like that 76. I don't need much more cooling than that. So that's really the basis of the energy savings. What?
You're from Miami, so I get it.
So that's really the basis of the energy savings is dialing back. And actually, not every building has overhead air heating, right? But for the buildings that do, we also save on the heating side in the flip way, right? So the space, if there's no one there, it's going to get colder, right? And then, if you walk in, you're working late on a Friday or whatever, and just you will have a jet of hot air right on you, right? Which is sort of like that personal air heater, but instead of it being, again, fighting the system or whatever, it's actually part of the main system.
What's already provided. So what
Exactly.
An amazing environment to be able to be adaptable to what's needed versus what's assumed. And I think that's how we've been operating buildings for so long is we just kick on the HVAC at 6 a.m. so that by 7:30, 8 a.m. where you start having influx of tenants, you have reached a certain level, but maybe data is telling you that people are not really in the office till 9:30 these days, or whatever that happens to be. Maybe they're out of the office totally on Friday, or you might have a tiny percentage. So having environments that can utilize energy based on need versus assumption is so incredible. And I mean, we've all been in that building that is saving energy over the summer and you're just absolutely sweating, or vice versa, you're freezing in the winter. So I think this is a really interesting kind of approach.
That's an interesting point, which is historically, you can't have it both ways. You either save energy or you make people happy.
Yes.
And this is, it's like, it sounds too good to be true, but like, this is actually doing both, right? Like the way that we make people happy.
These kinds of solutions that are adaptive. We have the technology and we have people, luckily in our industry, like you, who are passionate about, wrapping up all of their interests into one vertical and like really going hard in this direction, which I think is so cool. And I also think so from an environmental standpoint and sustainability standpoint, and also like a money saving standpoint for buildings, portfolio, shareholders, like that's what drives change in this industry. Huge. Yeah. Doing more, potentially having more money in your pocket from the same exact asset, not having to retrofit your entire building for potential cost savings. Like that's enormous, because it's not a major install or implementation process, if I remember correctly, right? What can you
So,
talk?
yeah, so rough justice, you're looking at between $1.50 to $2.50 to put NUMA in per square foot when you're doing a fit out, right? Like that's the range. To put that in perspective, like at 1.5 to $2.5 a square foot. I mean, if I was really going to be a sales guy, I would say in certain cases it's break even, right? But like on average, right? That's where most of the range is. Um, you're looking at for some of these builds, $250, $300 a square foot, right? For these fit outs. So you're talking about such a small percentage. Just the HVAC portion, a lot of these projects is like $60 a square foot. Um, so in my mind, it's like you're already spending all this money on having an HVAC system. Spend a few percent more and actually make everybody happy versus having 40% of the people be unhappy. In a
Well, and
retrofit scenario,
also optimizing the system you're spending money to invest in, right?
well, so I mean that's not right. That's not even counting how much money you're getting back. So when you count like local, right, varies, but let's say in New York you count like the Con Ed rebate program, the custom incentive. When you count all that, right, you can get the payback on doing NUMA to like 5-6 years, right? So it's kind of, again, biased here, but it's kind of a no-brainer in that regard. And I think that's all not even taking into account that you're also getting an air quality benefit, right? That's actually,
We want to talk about this because this is a huge topic.
it's actually depending on who you talk to, right? Like I know we're past the pandemic in a lot of ways, but
Yeah.
there are people who have completely ignored air quality now, and there are people who are still deeply invested in improving air quality in buildings. So it's
Wow.
interesting to see that the market has sort of split, whereas before everybody was obviously paying attention.
I think it really depends on like who that decision maker is and what their priorities are as an individual as well, and then the tenants that you are looking to attract in your building. Because one of the reasons I started this podcast was because health and wellness is a super priority for me in my life and a lot of the people that are in my life, and I know that it's becoming more and more of a priority to these next generation tenants, residents, people who are visiting hotels, who want experiences. Health and wellness is at the top of people's priorities list. So air quality is something that is so paramount in that equation, right alongside water and a variety of other environmental factors that contribute to happiness and productivity and collaboration and connection. For me, air quality is much more than just, are we avoiding COVID, which is of course important, and especially in New York City, like the repercussions of COVID are not small. So I appreciate that that's a factor. But I'm coming to New York in a couple of weeks from Florida. And like, I know that, I'm going to struggle to take a deep breath for, a few subways. And how long am I underground before I emerge into, is that fresh air when I finally emerge? Probably not. So if I'm going to work and sitting somewhere all day, the air quality, knowing that I could arrive at a place of work that has a sense of air filtration and is giving me an opportunity to have a quality of air,
Yeah.
that's enormous. That's more than just avoiding COVID. That's a major selling point and a major source of potential satisfaction from an employee in their workplace, from my opinion.
Yeah. No, and I think, look, I mean, now I've been sitting under a NUMA for 5 years now. So I've had some time to think about this, especially when I'm not. But I think, there's so many dimensions. When we talk about health in these buildings, there's so many dimensions to it, right? There's a whole part of it that NUMA doesn't really impact that much, which is like the people you're around, right? Like we go into offices to be around people, to share ideas, right? To connect, that's a whole thing. But just in terms of the air, essentially, being uncomfortable is disruptive, draining, and like it can lead to like breaking points for people, right?
Yeah.
To me, in the wellness, it's acute. You feel it immediately. You know what you're feeling, right? I've had people tell me like if I didn't have NUMA, I would have just gone home because like you said, a lot of landlords want to save energy and should, but for some people it's going to be too much, and so if they don't have a NUMA, they're like, I can't work in this environment. I'm sweating, right? So to me, like the thermal comfort side is very acute. We understand it. The air quality side is way more complex. And I was, just reading about this stuff. Like on one hand, there's the perception. So a bunch of research has been out around like air movement at certain speeds, less than a couple miles an hour, right? To give you a sense. So in the less than 200 feet per minute range, which is where we operate, gives you a feeling of better air quality, right? Which I think is really interesting. So perceived air quality is different than, actual air quality. And then there's the dimension of, virus spread, COVID or otherwise, like any kind of contaminant. And honestly, like I'm allergic to dust, like anything from the floor, like just things floating in the air, right, that we want to reduce. And then the third one that there's been, good research, there's been research going more back and forth is at what levels of sort of like carbon dioxide and other things do we see cognitive function drop-offs? We know that there's a story there, the exact shape of which I think, we're still doing research to figure out. But there's like multiple dimensions to how the air...
You'll have to come back to when you figure it out.
I'll update you. Yeah, like this is something I nerd out a lot. And I know some of the people in the field, in fact, one of them was like in the trenches with us when we were trying to figure out, okay, what flow rates do we need to hit? What heights should we be at? How does the fluid modeling work? Dr. Jovan Pentelik back in the day. But yeah, like for me, I've always been fascinated in knowing what's happening. And it just happens to be a field that is vibrant right now, right? Like, there's a lot of interesting things happening. There was a new study that showed that virus can live like 10 times longer at 800 parts per million carbon dioxide, which is common. 800 parts per million carbon dioxide is like the room you're sitting in now probably is around there. So it came out last year. It's really eye-opening. So for me, like we know that more ventilation, directed ventilation is better. The contours of that are still getting fleshed out, which is really cool to see.
What's like one of the more surprising things that you've learned building this product, rolling it out, the response? Because you could have a great product and the industry has all of its own challenges that comes with. So what's the surprising thing, and then what's the maybe challenging thing that maybe you didn't expect?
I mean, one of the surprises was, like I said, the delight part. Like we didn't really understand that we would be fun. It's not like that's our core personality. I mean, we're fun people, whatever. I'm not saying we're boring, but like I think that was a surprise. I have met, like, another part of this is like because of doing something genuinely new, I feel like I've come into contact with really bright, innovative people. It's like a self-selecting bunch. So that's like, on a personal note, super, super cool. On the challenging note, I think, we were eyes open about it, given that, again, the two companies that started NUMA, JB&B and SRS, been around for like 200 years almost combined. So we understood that the industry is slow to change. I think people like you do a great job of creating conversations and connecting people and spotlighting innovation. And there are more and more initiatives like that in our industry of people doing that work. But at the same time, people are so bogged down with their day-to-day, not like innovation takes time. It takes effort, right? Like I'd be lying to you if NUMA was like exactly the same as doing a traditional system. Of course it's different, right? We've spent a ton of time making it Like we've done turnkey installs for people. The product is pressure independent, self-balancing. Like there's so many features about it. The BMS integration is plug and play. We pre-configure all the IP. Like there's so many things on the install side where we've been like painstaking. And so when a contractor says, hey, that was really easy, we're like just as happy as when we actually get the sale. But at the same time, like, I could put myself in the shoes of an operator and be like, I am putting out fires, or, a building owner, or, a tenant. I am putting out fires. I'm trying to get through my day. I recognize that people are too hot, too cold. I recognize that, we haven't really done anything on the air quality front. I recognize that we're nowhere near our energy efficiency goals, but there's sometimes more immediate things that need to get done. So, shout out to those people who find the time to continue to push. And the interesting thing is, the other, I guess, surprise now that I'm thinking about it is, we came from sort of the design and build world, and I had connections with sort of the operating world from previous roles. It's been cool to see operators implement NUMA themselves, sometimes without even a contractor, like just connecting the ductwork, running the power over Ethernet to each device on their own, just to solve an acute problem they have, right? So, they always tell you with startups, with products, it's like, find the pain point, find the pain point. And so the people who actually have to answer the hot cold call, in some ways, are most motivated, because they're like, if I can reduce this by half, right? If half the time that people are emailing or calling me, they're just opening an app and moving a slider or moving an arrow and getting the air the way they want it, that frees up my day. That frees up my people's days. So when we first launched the product now over 2 years ago, we were not necessarily targeting those people. We were targeting more like the design and construction community. But we've done more projects now that are operator driven than, the champion being a designer or sort of, workplace strategy type person.
Makes so much sense. You're making that person's job 10 times easier, creating a satisfaction in the people that they answer to. That's incredible. So you guys are focused only on office? Like I couldn't have one of these in my home, is what you're saying?
We get the like, hey, my spouse and I, she runs hot, I run cold, or vice versa. Can we have one on either side of the bed? We've gotten that one a lot. We've gotten
either side of the bed is a good one. Yeah.
Yeah, we've gotten like all kinds of requests, and honestly, like we've shipped onesie twosies direct to random people and let them have at it. But I would say the other verticals that we're interested in, patient rooms. I think it's gonna take some time, because I think that's hallowed ground. But we're already doing a first project with a hospital here in New York in their administrative space. So I think that could be a launching pad to patient rooms. I think life sciences, we met someone at a conference who was really interested in odor management. And, that was also an unintended thing, right? Like you limit odors in and out when you have this downward current. Not something we've measured quantitatively, but from our other sort of air quality studies, it checks out, and it's, anecdotally been experienced by plenty of people. So just seeing those different applications, but I'm probably most excited about patient rooms just because, that person is there 24/7. They might be in pain. They might have to share a room with someone else. So having immediate control over their environment, I think would be really cool and really impactful. So yeah, I think, what else? I mean, what should we do doing, Mariel? Like, what do you think?
I mean, I imagine hospitality is probably a really interesting one. I also think like aging facilities is a really interesting one, probably for you guys. I think each one has its own personality and its own challenges. So I imagine that, each one takes some time to get to know and get to know, is it operator or is it design? You know, which one are we targeting to penetrate this market? But I think, you guys have a product that can support a lot of people's like health, comfort, a lot of these facilities, like their energy load. Because HVAC is taxed from so many things, right? It's taxed from dust in the air, like you said, you know, dust that's not being cleaned off of window slats. It's being taxed from stuff we don't, you know, cleaning products, stuff we can't even really think about or imagine taking care of from every direction. So the fact that you have a device that's easy to install, that's easy to use for the client, and is not a massive overhaul expense, I think it's a win. So, you know, I think there are a lot of different asset classes, even from like I think about like a university library, because you have so many different like areas where our students may be studying, and you might have one that's freezing that can't focus, or you're sweating and you can't focus and it may impact your education. I mean, I think it's endless. I mean, wherever you have real estate, you have people.
Like anywhere where someone is going to be like, I don't think it worked well in a cafeteria setting.
Right, or in a mall where people are moving.
Yeah, like you have to be like doing some sort of, you know, stationary thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's how I would think about it most generically. But I mean,
so coming
you're still
soon.
right. What?
TBD, coming soon.
Yeah, no, I mean, I honestly, we get all kinds of ideas. Right now, you know, we're still sort of focused on office, which admittedly, it's not been the easiest time for offices.
It hasn't, but that may be an opportune time for people with great solutions.
Yes.
From my perspective. Do you guys have partnerships like with other like office solution providers? Because I can see you guys in a lot of different partnerships. Complementary services.
So we have like representation from other HVAC type companies, from individuals in different regions. But we would like to do something with someone who's not in HVAC, and it's kind of interesting because on one hand, you know, they're not going to be connected to the HVAC designers and so forth, and we do get spec'd by, you know, MEP engineers. But on the other hand, they have more exposure to folks who can push NUMA, right? Like, you know, if a furniture company is more connected with the head of workplace or something, and that person is thinking more holistically about workplace experience, that's good for us. So we're kind of weirdos in that, because traditionally HVAC has not been of interest to sort of workplace experience minded people. It's like, how do we make the crossover? Say, hey, this is an HVAC thing that you might care about.
Right. Well, I think that health and wellness part comes back into play because it's such a top priority for tenants being in a space. They've been able to largely control their environment from home. They've largely been able to control like their experience working. So even potentially just like walking outside and getting fresh air while they're taking a conference call instead of, you know, sitting in a space and breathing stale air. So I think the more tenants are going to prioritize this part of the experience, the more, you know, corporate office decision makers are going to prioritize it, the more landlords are going to provide it and prioritize it as a potential way to market to those top tier tenants, because it's more and more competitive, especially in markets like New York City all the time. So
yeah, no, we've had now 3 different landlords in New York City put it in and like show their tenants the idea. You know? So it's interesting because sometimes the landlords have a deeper technical bench, and so they see how NUMA also benefits them. Like, again, some of these landlords, to meet their local Lot 97 goals, they're like, we need to raise our cooling set points and lower our heating set points, or else I don't know how we're going to pull this off. And then there's a question of like, well, how do we keep everybody comfortable and do that? And so that's been another sort of vector of essentially getting to the tenant through the landlord, which usually those two are at odds.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Are you guys focused on New York City, or you said 7 states? Actually, I'm sorry, you did say that.
Yeah, I think 6. So,
6.
And it's been, you know, totally random. Like, you know, getting pulled into, obviously Florida's great, California's great, but we've also done Pennsylvania. We've done New Jersey. You know, like, for us, our roots and a lot of our connections are in New York City, so naturally. But Saudi Arabia, we're going to have a third project in Saudi Arabia. Small projects, but like
Cool.
super cool. We've gotten inbounds from Ireland, like it's been really cool to see, how this really cuts through the noise and people are like, hey, I could see how this could work for me. Let's make it happen. And it's also really cool to see that, in some instances, like I said, we've done through SRS, we've done turnkey installs where we really did the whole thing. In other instances, we ship out units, we don't hear anything. Like we just did this for some engineers in Atlanta, and they put them in, and they're like, it's great. With JetBlue in Florida, actually, it was the same thing. It's like they just got the units. We never saw any drawings. We never even saw, they're like, we love it. So
That's awesome.
there's something cool about like low touch, high touch. On other projects, we're like marking up drawings, working with the architect, working with the design engineer. We're not afraid to do all the work to make everybody's life easier. But in some cases, like folks just, they're like, yeah, we read the installation guide, we're good. Or my favorite is early days, we installed it here at 80 Pine Street, and the contractor never opened the installation, like never looked at the installation instructions. They kind of just looked at it and they were like, okay, this is like springs, it's like a hi-hat, it goes up into the ceiling. They're like, whatever their intuition of how it should work is roughly how it worked, and that was it. So it's pretty fun.
Yeah, it's probably way different than the last version you had, but you just know how to use it. So that's the ideal case scenario.
So this is like one in a duct, right? And just to show you guys how easy it is, like it just comes out. It's just like a hi-hat. Just like
I'm able to like literally show it to us.
I'm like, why not? Yeah. So it just spring mounts in there, and then power over Ethernet, and then air connection. So it can sit in a duct. It can get flex duct connected to a nearby duct. So very
and then
simple.
It's its own app.
What?
It's its own app that like a tenant would download.
Yeah. So we've like offered people our SDK, our code, our Bluetooth interface to do their own app. If they want to do their own workplace app, like we're not precious about it all. But to date, everybody's used our app, and it's super cool. So they usually put like a little. We send them a little placard. So if it's a transient space or whatever, people aren't familiar with it. It just says, there's NUMA in this space to control your own air. Download the app. And that's it. And then they never hear from people again.
Cool. Well, I'm going to definitely drop your LinkedIn in the description so people can connect with you and ask probably so many questions that I didn't think to ask. Because I'm sure there's things to know and ask, especially depending on who's listening. If you're an engineer, if you're an architect, if you're a designer, if you're just the employee that wants this in their office, how do I advocate for that? So I'm sure people will, have a different take on this. Also in black. Lovely.
I feel like Vanna White over here, if anybody remembers.
What's that?
I feel like Vanna White over here, if anybody remembers.
Yeah. No, it's actually like super convenient that you can show us a real piece of hardware, because I feel like a lot of times, especially in these commercial buildings, it's like, sounds cool, but like, how does that actually work? And so to be able to just see that it's like something that fits right into like a hi-hat type of like vent, it's awesome. I don't know if everyone can see that, but I do want to ask you, just to finish us off for the day, like from a personal standpoint, this podcast is all about health and wellness. What's something that you do to take care of your own health? Could be anything.
Yeah. So, I love being outside. During the pandemic, I couldn't go outside, and I developed a bad Instagram habit of watching videos of people wing foiling, which is like a board and a hydrofoil and like a wing, like this, and at one point I was like, I'm watching a lot of these videos, and my wife was like, why don't you just like do it? So that's become my sort of like health and wellness move is, take the subway down to Jamaica Bay, get in the water, here in New York. New York's actually a beach city. Nobody knows it. And go sailing basically, and just kind of ride around.
I'm so glad I this.
Yeah, It's called wing foiling. For those who are adventurous and interested,
And
it's changed.
this is different than like this is
what? Yeah, I mean similar.
okay.
There's no like lines, so you're directly holding the sail essentially,
Okay.
and your board with the hydrofoil, your board comes out of the water. So
Cool.
if anybody's
I'll
actually
check out some
listening,
videos
this far, definitely hit me up if you're interested, because I've also taught people now, because I'm like,
Love it.
I'm like a missionary now. I want everybody to try it.
That's so cool. I'm definitely into it. I love water sports or any kind of sports. I love being outside, so we share that. But I'll have to just like start with checking out a video, and maybe I'll become obsessed like you. And I live in Florida, so how hard could it be to find a beach?
We're gonna visit clients in Florida in October, so
Come
I'll
hang
probably
out.
take my gear down, because usually October,
Yeah,
with the hurricanes and everything, is windy.
I love it. I love it. You're coming with your wife?
Probably not.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know that she, wants to look at NUMAs all day and then go sailing. Actually,
Well, if she
she's tried
wants
it
to
too.
come out, I could show her around. I could give her a little break.
Yeah, she's learning. She's learning to wing foil too. She really likes it. So
That's
actually,
awesome.
maybe you're right. She should come.
Just the thought. I'll be here. You let me know. No, but that's really cool. That's really cool. I'm so glad I asked this question. I would have known that about you, and I've never even heard of that sport. So I'll
Most
definitely
people
check it out.
haven't, and
Yeah, that's
usually I'm
really cool.
sheepish about sharing it, but I don't know. You got me.
No, you got it.
You're a good interviewer.
It's all the quirks that make us special, make us interesting. So I love that. So anyway, thank you so much for coming on. This was so interesting. I think that it's a topic, air quality. It's something that we'll talk about hopefully a lot on the podcast. Next week we'll talk about water and get into that. So there's all these amazing elements that really make that holistic approach to what is a healthy workplace, what is a healthy building, what does a healthy and happy employee look like. So I'm really excited to see, where you guys go, where you take it, and I'm just glad we get to see a little snippet of your journey. So thanks so much for sharing.